This live presentation was produced in Ashland, Oregon by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. RVML relies on the support of our volunteers, members, and donors to organize and present these programs. For more information about this presentation, or to borrow, download, or purchase other recordings from our catalog, please visit our website at rvml.org.
Hello, I'm happy to be here with you. It's nice to look out and see familiar faces as well as new ones. Can everyone hear me? Okay, good. So for those of you who have come to previous talks, you know that I come with kind of a mass of information that at least some of it I want to communicate. So there is the substance of the talk in terms of sharing ideas and information and awareness. But at the same time, and especially with a topic like the power of the heart, but really in all the talks, it's really about the magic of the particular group of people that come together, and how the talk ends up will really be shaped by who's here and what the questions and responses are. So that's my invitation to say I'm a fairly responsive, interactional type of speaker. So feel free, if you've lost me or want clarification, to let me know as we go along. So, you know, I've been doing these talks pretty much every 6 months at the RVML for a while now, and I sometimes commit to the date, and then only as the date approaches do I commit to a topic. And it's always kind of like, okay, what should I speak on? Many of you know that I'm a soul-level healer, and I work individually, but I also work through a group process called the Hellinger Family Constellation Work. So the better part of wisdom, from a practical point of view, would be always to speak on those things. But there's so many different awarenesses that I like to share that I just kind of wait and listen. And this topic, the power of the heart, is something that is very near and dear to my heart. And of all the, if you look at all the variety of things I've spoken on or might address, the heart is really the underlying unifying container to all of those things that might seem different. The heart is the unifying aspect to what moves me to speak and to share. So I thought it would be interesting and useful to address that very directly tonight. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to share some of my own experience with the heart and the heart center. And then I do have some sharings from particular books that I'll weave in at a certain point as well. And I thought I'd mention those up front because it's always interesting for me to get feedback how many people might be familiar with some of these. So I'm going to be drawing on a book that might seem unexpected. It's called The Secret Teachings of Plants and the Direct Perception of Nature. Is anyone familiar with this book? Okay, well this is definitely one of the books that I'll be recommending, and there's a few things I'd like to share from because it has, section 2 is on the heart, and there's actually chapter by chapter different aspects of the heart that's covered. And this right away addresses or gets to one of the reasons why the heart is so important and why it's so important to me, which is that it's through the heart really that we commune with nature and that we can experience our oneness with the planet as a being. And so this book about the direct perception of nature and the secret teachings of plants intrinsically then covers a lot about the heart and the power of the heart. So I'm going to draw on this quite a bit. And then I'm not sure how much I'll draw on this book, but this is one I wanted to mention. It's one I know the library has. It's called Love Without End. How many people are familiar with this book? Okay. And again, this book has specific sections on the heart as well as an awareness of the heart woven throughout it. So again, if you're intrigued, I always feel that part of my purpose in giving these talks is hopefully not only to share information, but to titillate your interest so that you might be motivated to read and research some on your own. And then this book is called The Enlightenment of the Whole Body by Bubba Freejohn. Anyone familiar with this one? This book is out of print now, so it will be hard probably to track down if you end up wanting to do that. But this book becomes a good introduction to some of my own history and relationship with learning and understanding about the heart, because Bubba Freejohn, or as he came to be called, Adida, was one of my first teachers as I began what we call the spiritual path or the spiritual quest. And so his perception and his understanding has been kind of a containment, I guess, for my whole adventure of these many years. And Adida always referred to his work in three different ways. He called it the way of the heart, or the way of divine ignorance, or the way of understanding. And as you came to understand what he meant by those three phrases, they're all different ways of saying the same thing, basically. So I will share a little bit about his esoteric. In this book, The Enlightenment of the Whole Body, he really goes into some quite refined and developed understanding of the esoteric levels, not only of the heart, but of the brain. So for people that are interested, that it's quite a resource. So, okay, any questions or reactions to that much? So, I guess my basic view, how many people, when you say the heart, how many people think in terms of fourth chakra? Is that okay? Because when I refer to the heart, it includes but is not limited to the fourth chakra. So I thought that might be useful to put out right away. And the basic way I've come to see and understand the heart is that it's a magnetic vortex, and the most powerful magnetic vortex for human beings. The reason why I find it useful to address the heart is it's the heart that is, of course, very almost interchangeable and very integrated with our understanding of the soul and soul level healing or soul level development. And it's through the heart that our humanness is honored and developed in the context of spiritual growth and development. Does that make sense? And, you know, just all of our expressions that we have about the heart, being good-hearted or kind-hearted, warm-hearted, cold-hearted, there's all sorts of expressions that point to that human dimension. And we automatically associate the heart with the realm of emotions and feelings, although as we go along, hopefully I can clarify how some of, we kind of sometimes lump together things that need to be distinguished. So let's take a moment before I babble on anymore to actually take a moment and be quiet and just close our eyes. And I invite you to just allow your awareness to settle more fully into your body, and just to be curious to notice your own heart space in this moment. And let's allow our intention that the speaking and the listening, that the sharing itself will come from and through and enhance the heart awareness. So initially, I'm just going to read this poem by Kabir, and we'll let the poetry itself evoke the heart awareness. Near your breastbone there is an open flower. Drink the honey that is all around that flower. Waves are coming in. There is so much magnificence near the ocean. Listen. Sound of big seashells, sound of bells. Kabir says, friend, listen. This is what I have to say. The guest I love is inside me. Near your breastbone there is an open flower. Drink the honey that is all around that flower. Good, so we'll let that be the poetic description of the heart. I know what I want to share, and I'm not sure how I'm going to meander into it, but if you hang in there with me, we'll get there. So in terms of my own journey, I started out with this American-born guru who emphasized all about the heart. And at that time in my life, I'd have to say my heart was pretty majorly defended as a fortress. So I don't know, can any of you remember that state when you had really good, solid defense around the heart? And part of the eternal gratitude that I still feel for Adida is that he got past all my defenses much more quickly and directly than I think it would have taken a therapist years of chipping away. And so it began this incredible process of noticing, the protection, the layers of self-protection around the heart, and then this process of wanting to open and allowing the kind of softening that allows all those hard edges to begin to melt away, and for the body armoring to relax, and for the heart to just begin to have the merest opportunity to begin to reveal its great secrets and powers. And that process, of course, continues. But fairly early on, I realized, I didn't stay in the community with Adida. And what the universe brought to me as the next step was a man named Don Colmar who did this soul-level healing work that eventually I became trained in to do. And in this work, the heart was emphasized as the doorway to the soul, which is one of the traditional understandings about the heart, is that it's the doorway to the soul. And so in the attunement work, we would always cultivate awareness of the heart and call on the soul through the heart. But the process itself was very much simply being with and attending to whatever arose in your field of consciousness without trying to shape it in any way. So you weren't trying to say, oh, if I was a good-hearted person, I'd be loving and kind and, et cetera, and then trying to be that. But it was simply allowing whatever was there to come forward. And that turns out to be the trick. There isn't anything that we can do to force the heart. The heart does not respond to any kind of force or impatience. But the natural movement of the heart, when it's allowed for and listened to, and whatever is present is allowed for, then this ongoing process of opening and deepening can take place. And so that's really, in a certain sense, the training was doing our own work so that we knew how to be present in a clear way. And so, but again, there was this emphasis around the heart. And initially, I guess this gets a little bit into some of the esoteric aspects of the heart. How many people are interested? I mean, is that part of what brought you here, were the esoteric aspects? Okay. Okay. And what brought you? Go ahead. Yeah, okay. Okay. So all of this part is probably familiar territory to most people, I'm assuming, in the room. And what you begin to realize, though, is that the heart isn't just one thing, one center. This goes back to the fact that it's not just the fourth chakra. And on the esoteric levels of the heart, spiritually, there's actually 3 different centers. And one is on the left, slightly lower, and then one is in the center, and one is on the right, slightly higher. And I mention this because the attunement work, we worked out of the heart on the left and the heart in the center. And Adida had always emphasized the heart on the right, which wasn't part of my awareness at all, or my teacher's awareness in the attunement work. So I hadn't really planned to explain what those are, but I'll go ahead and do that. What's that?
That's what we want.
Okay, but I'll go ahead and interject that at this point. So, I think I know this well enough to say it without notes, but I'll just pull out my notes in case. So the heart that's just, so everyone, if you feel, is everyone here familiar with feeling your heart center? I mean, eventually when the heart really opens, the heart is no longer localized in any of these spots, okay? That's the point. When the heart really opens, it becomes the whole field of awareness, okay? And that's why traditionally the heart, in addition to being called the seat of the soul or the doorway to the soul, was also sometimes called the doorway to everything, because the heart has this immense capacity to open and be one with all that is. And so it ends up not being localized, but nonetheless, we all kind of also know and can relax into that seemingly physically localized area of the heart. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about how amazing actually the physical heart is, because it ends up validating a lot of what we think of or understand about the spiritual heart. But first I'll go ahead and talk about these 3 aspects since I've mentioned them. So the heart on the left, which is, if you feel the general heart area, it's just slightly lower and slightly to the left, very close. It's that awareness that we initially were encouraged to notice. And that aspect of the esoteric heart correlates roughly to the waking state, okay? And it corresponds and intertwines with the solar plexus in terms of chakras, and it corresponds with the verbal mind, and therefore with the throat and with the personal verbal mind and communication, which is part of its relationship then to the waking state, okay? But it's a very useful center to cultivate awareness of, especially if and as you want to be more present in your heart as you go about your daily life, okay? It's a very useful center. And then the center that's actually in the center, and what, like if you're into Hindu literature, when they talk about the anahata center, this is what they're talking about, the center part of the heart. And this is said to correlate to, it includes the physical heart and the lungs and breathing. So anytime in meditation we're encouraged to be aware of the cycle of breath, that's in a certain sense helping to activate this anahata center. And it's related to the creative dimension of life and correlates to the dream state, okay? And Adida says it relates both to the subconscious mind and the superconscious mind, okay? So it's a very powerful center. And I'll come back to maybe talking about some of that. But the deepest aspect of the esoteric level of the heart is the heart on the right. If you've ever read anyone like, say, Ramana Maharshi, when he refers to the heart, he's really referring to this deeper aspect of the heart. And it's an aspect that correlates to the deep sleep state and to the state in which the individual self disappears, okay? And so it's related both to the deep unconscious mind and also to the transcendental consciousness. It's kind of the realm of pure beingness beyond any individual form or identity. And Adida always used to say that consciousness comes to rest in the heart on the right. Okay, so that's the beginning, one level of understanding some of the esotericism of the heart. And in an evolutionary sense, we're kind of at an evolutionary point of humanity of needing to move into the opening of the anahata heart, and the heart that we understand in terms of more love and compassion, but also the realm of, this film that's kind of currently making a splash in kind of mass consciousness, The Secret. I finally got around to watching that recently, and I thought, really rather than tying it into thought at all, if you want to talk about The Secret and the law of attraction, tying it into the heart is a much wiser and actually more powerful, way to hook that up. And I'll go ahead, since I've stumbled onto this, I'm going to read you a quote from the Upanishads, because this level of understanding is quite ancient, but esoteric. So this is, again, in Dafrijan's book, but he's quoting here from a Upanishad. Smaller than the small, greater than the great, the self is set in the heart of every creature. The unstriving man beholds him, freed from sorrow. Through tranquility of mind and the senses, he sees the greatness of the self. So it's a reference again to the heart. What's in another Upanishad is called the cave of the heart, the innermost chamber of the heart. So this basically, I got off on this because of this notion that as the heart initially is allowed to open, it goes through a deepening process, and there are usually names for those deeper processes. One of my teachers just called it the inner chamber, but you'll notice that there's different depths of the heart that can open. And the heart goes through a process of expanding. And they're kind of twin movements. The deepening allows for the expanding allows for the deepening, okay? And then eventually, the heart is just open as the field of awareness, no longer localized seemingly around the physical heart area, okay? Are you familiar with these levels or aspects of the heart? I wanted to share some of this because this is what allows us to begin to really honor and pay attention to the power of the heart. People are still coming in. So what I thought I'd do now is we'll back up and we'll cover some of the physical aspects. So again, a lot of my first exposure to the heart was through this book, The Enlightenment of the Whole Body, and believe me, most of it at the time was way over my head. Some of it still is. But it was definitely over my head and not of my own experience. A lot more of it has become experiential now over the years, but at the time I was first exposed to it, it was not. And so certain things that I would hear or read about because I had access to this book, one was he would talk about the spiral. Now, again, these are, he'd talk about the spiral current of the heart, which he called the Amrita Nadi. And he'd always emphasize the importance of the Amrita Nadi and the spiral current of the heart. And I hadn't really gone back to this book for quite a while. I kind of went back to it in preparing for this talk. But in the meantime, I'd run across this book. Now, Enlightenment of the Whole Body came out in 1978, okay? And he was writing a lot either from these Upanishad sources or from his own direct realization, okay? He wasn't relying on the findings of modern science. But in this book, which came out only in 2004, this particular author did a lot of research in a lot of the recent scientific research into the physical level workings of the heart. Of course, when we say physical level and spiritual, we're making kind of a false distinction, but nonetheless, it can be useful. And how many people, if you think back like to your basic biology about the heart, how would you first think of just the physical level heart? A pump, right. Good. What's that? A big, strong muscles that contracts and forces the blood to circulate through the body, the basic pump. And that whole image and understanding of the heart, of course, is based on a mechanistic view. It's kind of like, well, the way the machine works is there's got to be something that forces the energy. And so the body was viewed as a machine, and the heart was seen as the main pump. And so I found it quite fascinating when to find out that the latest research, they'll still talk about the heart as a pump. But now they talk about it being an electromagnetic generator, producing a wide range of electromagnetic frequencies, an endocrine gland making and releasing numerous hormones, and a part of the central nervous system. The heart is, in fact, a brain in its own right. Okay? Then it goes on and talks some more about that. Now, in terms of the pumping heart aspect, since, we won't totally give up that it works with that, I just thought these are kind of fun facts. The heart beats approximately 100,000 times per day, which is 40 million times per year, which is 3 billion times in an average lifetime of 70 plus years. So, just that kind of physical level fact alone is quite impressive for the power of the heart. But now what they're finding is that they don't really believe that the heart actually pumps the blood, that the heart doesn't actually force the blood to circulate, that is non-intuitive as it seems. The blood seems to circulate on its own. So I thought I'd read a little bit of this in terms of the non-pumping heart. Modern analysis of the heart has shown that in spite of the fact that the most powerful ventricle of the heart can shoot water 6 feet into the air, the amount of pressure actually needed to force the blood through the entire length of the body's blood vessels would have to be able to lift a 100-pound weight 1 mile high. The heart is incapable of producing the pressure actually needed to circulate the blood. The heart is, in reality, not the pump of the circulatory system, but plays a much more subtle and elegant role. For the heart does not pump the blood counterintuitively moves of its own accord. And then it goes in and talks about some research done with chicken embryos and how they've kind of come to discover this. So I thought, well, there goes my whole basic minimal amount of high school biology I remembered. Now remember how I said Adida always made this big thing about the Amrita Nandi and the spiral current of the heart? Well, lo and behold, this is what they've found. Blood flow through the vessels is composed of 2 streams. These 2 streams spiral around one another in the direction of flow. Nor do these streams flow at a regular rate. Their rates can vary sometimes significantly. At the center of these spiraling streams, there is nothing, a vacuum. In fact, blood flow through living vessels is much more like a tornado than anything else. It is a vortex circling around a vacuum center. At all times, up to 1/3 of the space occupied by the bloodstream is a void, a vacuum. Such a vacuum is necessary for producing a vortex. So over and over again now, they talk about this spiraling in the heart. And so I thought, oh my God, Adida knew what he was talking about there. So I don't know about you, but I've never imaged the blood flowing through the body in that kind of tornado movement. I thought that was quite interesting and fascinating. And again, begins to get to how even some of the rudimentary ways we've come to think we know about the heart that is kind of out of date, So I wanted to mention some of that. There are sections for those, again, that, to try to motivate people to maybe pursue some of this, because there's a lot more information in this book than I'll be able to share. But then he's got a section on the research about the heart as an endocrine gland and as part of the central nervous system. And the part I wanted to share with you then is when he has a section on the heart as electromagnetic center. And so I thought some of this was worth reading. This is like, stand in amazement of our bodies as well as in our deeper aspects of potential that the heart reveal. Okay, where do we want to see? Blood, so the heart is, of course, closely connected with the blood, and they found that blood is a very good conductor of electromagnetic waves. Let me see, where do I want to start reading it? The heart produces a tremendously powerful broadband electromagnetic field as it beats. When the electromagnetic patterns of the heart are imaged, they form patterns similar to those given off by a magnet. A magnet's magnetic field can be demonstrated by placing iron fillings on a sheet of paper and holding the magnet underneath it. The filings will quickly move onto the paper into a pattern, aligning themselves to the magnetic field that the magnet produces. But the magnetic field produced by the heart is not located on a flat piece of paper. It extends around the body in a torus, a fractal sort of spherical shape that continually flows through space. Okay? You get that? The heart is a magnetic vortex that flows in a torus, the same shape that is the electromagnetic field of the planet Earth. So this torus shape of the heart corresponds exactly in a fractal relationship probably to the electromagnetic field of the Earth. Does everyone know what a torus is, that kind of flow of shape? It's like the core of the Earth, or the core of the center, and the flow comes up and around in this circular movement, okay? Yeah, like a donut, kind of. And it's a very basic energy flow pattern. I already knew that was true in terms of, the electromagnetic field of the Earth. It was quite exciting to realize that literally the physical heart works in the same way. Okay, now, be ready to be amazed and stand in respect of the heart for this next statement. Okay. Measured with magnetic field meters, the electromagnetic field that the heart produces is 5,000 times more powerful than that created by the brain. Whoa. 5,000 times more powerful than the field generated by the brain. While strongest at the body's surface, it extends out further than the human measuring devices can detect. The most sensitive electromagnetic devices human beings know how to make can still detect it at up to 10 feet from the body. But there's actually no limit to how far the field can extend. So, I think that's pretty amazing. The electromagnetic field of the human body aligns roughly along a person's spine from the pelvic floor to the top of the skull. This field permeates every cell in the body. So this is, again, this inner core that how many people, when you meditate or have had the experience of that awareness, that there is this inner core, this inner opening? So this would be the central channel through which, the vortex would circulate around then. Okay, what else? Let's see. So they talk about how these electromagnetic frequencies, that the frequencies carry information. Okay? So we talk about different frequencies of energy. Every frequency would carry its own coding or information. Each section of the field, no matter how small, contains all the information encoded within the whole field. So there's that fractal notion. The Earth's magnetic field is a very similar torus or pattern to what the heart and magnets emit, and then they talk a little bit more about that. The whole body is cradled within the electromagnetic field generated by the heart. DNA is very sensitive to electromagnetic fields. So anyway, those are just little tidbits of information from that. But again, I really wanted to give you some backup for this notion of the power of the heart. I am not a scientist, and I don't have a scientist's understanding of it, but I love that kind of understanding that reinforces what we can feel intuitively and begin to access as we learn to quiet and center. Any questions or reactions to that much? That's good. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm wondering how it relates to illness when a person's heart is locked or repressed.
Well, there is, yes, I won't, yes, okay, so the question was wondering how illness impacts on the field of the heart, right? Okay. So I'll say a couple things. There is a section in this book that addresses that, so I can refer you to that. But part of what it says, and this fits with, if you've come to my talk, like let's say the last talk I gave was on releasing the soul. And my basic understanding as a soul level healer, which correlates to the heart, is that the role of the healer is to allow the life of the soul to flow, to see the ways in which it has become rigidified or frozen into certain predictable repeating patterns, and to allow the inherent freedom of unfoldment to come forth, okay? So if I reference back to that talk on the soul, one of the soul's qualities is its extreme sensitivity and its impressionability. And that very sensitivity and impressionability is what allows it then to get imprinted with patterns, emotional patterns that freeze it, okay? And so the idea is to release those fixations, okay? And the research that's done on the heart in terms of this is similar, that when left to its own, there's a certain degree of pattern within chaos, let's say, but there's a wider range of how it can show up. And what illness does, or what illness results from, because it's probably not a direct cause and effect, but relates to those frequencies and permutations becoming lessened. And so that's why, we see it, say symbolically, would correlate to older people if they become really set in their ways. That literally the heart as well, if it gets set in certain frequencies, isn't as healthy as when it's allowed a more dynamic expression. Does that make sense? I mean, that's a very layperson's capturing of what he talks about, but he does have a section about that, and it's quite, again, informing, because I understand the psychodynamic aspects of the levels of healing. That's my specialty, not the physical level health aspects. But it was interesting for me to see that there is a correlation. Does that make a stab at that? And again, you can refer, I can show you this section if you're interested. Okay, so, yes, go ahead.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Hearn will bring it back.
Chose a good night to be here. Thank you. I've also seen The Secret many times, and I just wanted to comment that from my own personal experience and research that I've done, they talk about the mind being the new frontier, but we still tend to think of the mind as up here in the head. And my own experience is that the source of the mind is from the heart, and that the brain then just creates words and thoughts from that. So eventually, sooner or later, they're going to figure this out and get it that that source of mind really is coming from the heart, and that's really where our creative power is coming from. And I was just wondering if anything like that is in that book, which I want to now own.
Yes, well, certainly my own encouragement is always, that if you want a place to focus, you can't go wrong by focusing at the heart. And yes, we all know, kind of even poetically speaking, that the heart has its own knowing, has its own understanding, and that to see truly, you have to see with love. And, I could pull out various quotes of, how the eyes see, or the eyes of the heart see differently, those kinds of awarenesses. But again, it's quite exciting. There is a section in here where he goes in and talks about how they're scientifically now really discovering that the heart functions literally as a second brain, and that the heart is kind of directly wired to the brain. And so they're in continual communication. And that's the other thing about this heart being the magnetic vortex that extends. It also gives us our own understanding of how and why we influence one another, because our fields are, of course, interpenetrating all the time, aren't they? And so that's one of the next thing he talks about is coherency. Now, you can talk about coherency in terms of brain waves, that when brain waves become more coherent, that's a good state of consciousness. But the heart as well. That's why being, this spiritual tradition that says, like hang out with realized beings. It's like just to be in their energy field, you begin to become coherent to their field. You begin to entrain to that field. And so when the heart is open, people feel good around that. And you'll notice that as your heart opens more, people are drawn to that. People say, well, I feel good when I'm with you, or I feel safe with you, I feel I can talk to you. That's a response on the human level to the field of the heart being open and available. It's like an invitation, So yes, I'd say the heart has a deeper wisdom, and there's a reason why the ancients called it the doorway to everything. And this isn't to pit it against the brain, because the brain, there's the ajna center, which is up in the head area, and there's esoteric aspects to that as well, of course. But in the end, according to the most esoteric level teachings that I've had access to, it all comes back to the heart. And the ajna center is only a certain limited stage. It doesn't have the unlimited reach that the heart does. So I was going to read some more on coherency, but I'll just let that be enough, because I see we're kind of running out of time already. That's the problem with getting a while to get going, is then let's read you. Well, I won't read this because I think it's something we're familiar with, and I'll just put it into my own words. But it's this pointing to what we lost as a human species when we made this evolutionary movement in the West into the Enlightenment and into putting the emphasis on the brain and on science. So science as a scientific method is great, and it's not at all about throwing that out. But in our culture, really, science has become scientism. It's become like the new religion. And it presumes a state of consciousness or reality that shuts us off from the experience of the world as a living awareness that we commune with. And that's what many of us have been, opening up beyond, and it's why many of us value being in nature and in the wilderness so much, because this is where we begin then to feel that the cosmos is alive, that it has an inherent sacredness, and that it communes with us, and that, that's where this book is really about, literally learning how to access the wisdom that the plants can communicate, but they communicate not through the verbal awareness. So you have to be able to show up and be present in a different way. and indigenous peoples seem to have had that ability, at least to a more developed extent than we have. So again, that was just another aspect of kind of pointing to a whole different perceptual awareness that opens when you move deeper and deeper into listening with the heart. The other thing, in terms of relating a little bit to the secret and a little bit to the importance of the heart, is the heart, to access it and to continue to allow it to deepen and unfold, requires not only a certain psychodynamic release, but a moral development, okay? So that there are certain emotions. The heart, it has this association with emotions, but emotions include kind of reactive emotions, right? But those can go through a process of clarification and then become more expansive expressions. I don't know if I should have opened that can of worms because I don't have a lot of time to develop it. Maybe I can come back to it after the break if people are interested. But to continually allow this magnetism of the heart to really go full force, you can't do it without going beyond the narrow band of reactive human emotions. And so it becomes kind of a safeguard. I mean, I don't know how many of you, again, in watching The Secret, the way they talked about the law of attraction tied it into no moral development at all. And, it's something that I find kind of shocking, really. But they even said it's completely neutral, it's completely neutral. And I think that's true in a certain way, and that should be like a red flag right away. It's like, do we really want it to be neutral, And so the clarification at the heart will automatically then give rise to these deeper human emotions. And that's where I come back to this interest I have in the heart, which is really about calling forth our humanity, okay? So all the esotericism aside, just on the level of humanity, just on the level of learning to live with one another, the heart seems to me to hold out the greatest possibility. And many of you know I facilitate the Hellinger work, and I'm not speaking directly on that tonight. If any of you want to hear me speak directly on that, I'm giving a talk April 2nd as part of the Monday night series at the Co-op, and I'm going to speak specifically on the Hellinger work. But that soul level understanding that comes through in the Hellinger work, one of the things, and it didn't happen right away, it happened over time for me, participating in many, many constellations. And really it came more through participating as a representative than it did through what I learned as a facilitator. But there was that moment where I suddenly found myself saying, I'm in awe of the human spirit. And this is the theme that in all my talks I like to come back to now, because this is my interest, is to call forth the goodness of the human heart, to call forth the greatness of the human spirit, and they're intertwined. And this is what can give us the capacity, the soul capacity to actually respond to the challenges that we're facing. And so rather than feeling kind of dismally about the human potential and feeling like we need some alien race to come and save us or that it's all hopeless, it's a way to come to respect our own species. And in the Hellinger work, there's what they call the orders of love. And in the orders of love, one rough example would be that a child bows to the parents, but the parents do not bow to the child, okay? But in a relationship of husband and wife, they bow to one another. And one time I participated in a collective constellation. I know I'm throwing in a lot here at the end, and the awareness came through that as a species, humanity bows to the planet. The planet has a higher order reality. The planet can survive without us. We cannot survive without the planet. It's that kind of simple order of love, the context. And so in that sense, we bow to the planet. But in the representation of the human heart, then it was like husband and wife. Then we bow to one another. And you see that human heart, that is that vortex, that is the torus, is so similar to that electromagnetic field of the earth that is that torus. And so there's an equality there. And so somehow that maybe I can't quite put my finger on communicating in the clearest way, I suddenly became so enlivened, on fire inside with this awareness that we have this capacity, not only as individuals but as a species, to call forth this greatness of our human capacity. And the heart is the ticket for that. So that's part of why I want to celebrate and help raise awareness about the power of the heart. So I'll let that be it for this first part, and we'll take a little break. And then we'll have a lot more leeway to shape the second half. And I haven't decided exactly what we'll do, but we'll do something experiential, whether it's a meditation or breaking into dyads or something. But we'll do something experiential to really allow the energy of the heart to touch each of us where we're at. So thank you very much. I found one other just short quote that I want to just share, and then I'll open it up to questions, and then we'll see what comes up in terms of what we can do experientially. But this is a little section in this Secret Teachings of Plants when he's exploring how the heart communicates with the external world, okay? Which is, again, part of why he's talking about the heart at all, is how the heart opens up this direct perception of nature. Okay, so here it is. The heart generates the strongest electromagnetic field of the body, and this field becomes more coherent as consciousness shifts from the brain to the heart. So that's just to reiterate kind of the point that we discussed in the earlier part of the talk about the importance of bringing awareness to the heart, is that it actually helps then with the coherency. So are there questions or responses, things that want to be said before we explore otherwise?
I have a question as far as what actually happens to the body when the body decides to die. If I'm listening to you tonight and I'm listening to the energy field and the importance of being aware of the patterns that we might be putting a groove down and things like that. So what do you think actually happens when the body just decides to shut down?
I'm not sure I'm prepared to respond to that question. Or I might not even be qualified to respond, but in the moment anyway, I'm drawing a complete
speculation,
blank.
maybe.
Yeah. I think I'll pass on that one if you don't mind.
Not at all.
If something pops up later, I'll share it with you.
One thought that came that you inspired tonight is I was thinking about how come that we find in Aboriginal places that are distant from big cities like Siberia and other Aboriginal places, you will find that people will live 120 and 130 years of age being so close to nature.
Right.
And the whole connection that you were speaking of.
Yes.
Of the source. So.
Yes, and I'll just let that go. I thought of something I could say, but thank you. Yes. Anyone else? There's someone in the back. Uh-huh.
So, in your studies, is the identity wrapped up in the heart, like the self? Like, I was thinking, what happens when people get artificial hearts? Do they still exhibit the same joyousness, or what about like something like that?
Well, I don't have a lot of direct experience, of course, with heart transplants and what happens. It is mentioned in this book that the heart stores memory, Okay, that we, again, tend to think of memory being stored in various compartments of the brain. But they understand now that the heart does store memory, and which kind of makes sense of our actual experience, doesn't it? And even why we tend then to protect our hearts at a certain stage is because of those stored memories of hurts or felt betrayals. And so when he's talking about how they find that the heart does store memory, he does mention that sometimes when people receive a heart in a heart transplant, they suddenly have habit patterns or impulses come up that weren't part of their experience ahead of time. So it doesn't seem to, it doesn't make them a totally different person, but it does seem to definitely, there seems to be some carryover. And we were also at the break, I was speculating with someone, we know that certain diseases are genetic. Well, in this awareness that the DNA is sensitive to the electromagnetic field, it opens up some interesting possibilities about how disease is passed through the field, which again touches on this, on the Hellinger constellation work that I facilitate, because part of the understanding that becomes so vividly real there is what gets passed generationally through what we call the field, so that people are oftentimes experiencing and having as their reality something that is actually coming from what we call an entanglement with a previous generation. So it opens up interesting possibilities, but and I will, one of the things I want to go ahead and pick up, although I'll take some more questions, I am going to clarify a couple more things around the emotions, so help me remember that. So, but there's some other questions.
I just wanted to recommend a book. Maybe you've read it. It's The Heart's Code by Dr. Paul Pearsall. And I don't know if it's in the Metaphysical Library, but it should be. And he is a heart transplant surgeon, and he wrote an entire book answering the question that you just asked.
Yeah, intriguing.
And then another one, Bruce Lipton's Biology of Belief.
Yes.
I'm sure you're familiar with that. And that addresses the whole issue of generational energy
Yes, and
patterns
how it
being
gets
passed down
passed.
and how that happens with the genes and all of that good stuff. Okay.
Good.
I was just wondering if you had like any tips on keeping the heart open and just like throughout normal daily life and stuff. I tend to have like, experiences and it gets way open, and I find later it's not as open, or, different times. And just wanted to ask something along those lines.
Well, if you're noticing the contrast between when it's open and when it's not, then you're already on the way, because just that noticing awareness shows that there's already a momentum and that unfolding will continue. And the ways to cooperate that is through cultivating the awareness. So periodically throughout the day, if you can just kind of remember to check in with the heart. And remember, the heart never responds to force or impatience or commands or trying. And so it simply becomes that process of attending to whatever is perhaps causing the heart to contract more. I can give you an example from my own life experience. This was at a point when I was living in a spiritual community and had the opportunity to do a 6-month meditation retreat. So I was able to go, quite deep. And it was already a point in my life when my heart was open, when an open heart was a continuous experience. So the walls of all the walls, the years of all the walls and defensiveness had, I'd gotten past that. And the heart was open as my ongoing experience. And one morning I remember waking up, and I didn't even know at first what was off. I just knew, well, something's off, what is this? And I suddenly realized, kind of horrified, oh my God, my heart is closed, And so I searched out some friends and fellow teachers that I trusted and, inquired into like what was going on. And what was coming up, what it turned out for me in that instance, was this hatred this incredible sense of feeling betrayed by God and this kind of fuck you energy back. And it's what Almas, years later I picked up a book by Almas called Facets of Unity, and he has a chapter in there where he talks about the beast. And what he was describing as the beast is what I experienced that day that, closed my heart. But once I was with it and allowed that to come forward, then the heart was quite happy to open again. And so that's part of the awareness. It's not about imposing a positive thought or a positive state onto where you're at. I can't emphasize that enough. It's not about saying, I should feel this, so let's try to get to that state. It's always about simply being present with what is and inquiring. And if you inquire, if you really allow the process to go, believe me, some very unloving states are going to come up. But you have the ability then to be present and allow that. I mean, this was sheer hatred that was coming up, And if our orientation is to say, oh, I'm a spiritual person, I should be feeling loving, we don't allow all of what needs to come up then. So that's why the orientation that is most helpful is the heart will allow for what needs to come up at greater and greater depth. So it sounds like you're on the road, and just notice, be gentle, be a gentle, loving friend with yourself whenever you're noticing that maybe the heart isn't as open as you'd like, and then just be curious to discover what that is about. And through that awareness, then you'll go through the ongoing process of the heart becoming more and more clarified, more and more transparent and open. So I hope that helps. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I've heard one.
Oh, here's the mic.
One interpretation of enlightenment that I've heard is simply following your intuition from moment to moment in your life. And I was curious from the beginning of your talk what you thought about the heart awareness that you speak of, and if that's the same intuition that one follows just moment to moment. I think it's the same, it's congruent.
It's the same thing. It's like intuition is definitely a part of it, but it's like what we understand as intuition is also like can grow and deepen and magnify, so that not to put a limitation, I guess, on how that further unfolds, but. Yes, that inner knowing that comes forth from beingness itself, intuition is like the early way that works.
And that's
So
the
it is
same
an
as the heart
extension of
awareness that you have been referring to.
Yes,
Yes?
it's that. Yes, it's simply the inner knowing comes. Well, it comes in mysterious ways. That's the other thing. I mean, the beginning and the end and the middle of all of this is mystery. And in fact, Audi Da used to say the secret of how to be happy is to remember the mystery. So, I have an active mind and I love exploring all of this, but, really you come back to the mystery and the stillness and the silence. And but out of that does come this knowing in mysterious ways. Anyone else? So I'm going to make a very brief, what I hope is a brief clarifying statement, and then we'll do something, we'll quiet. If you're not on my email mailing list and want to be, I think I have a sign-up sheet back there, and you can sign up, and I have some flyers and information back there that you can pick up. And I mention that because when I send out announcements about the Hellinger constellations, I've been trying to come up with various quotes from Hellinger to include. And the quote I'm going to be including this time is going to be what I'm going to try to summarize very quickly here in terms of different types of feelings or emotions. Because we know the heart is the domain of feeling. And in fact, Adida's definition of enlightenment was feeling without limitation to infinity. And so it's that feeling capacity of the heart has that capacity to experience infinity. But in terms of emotions that, you know, have to be attended to along the way, so to speak, Hellinger liked to clarify 4 different types of emotions or feelings. And one he called secondary emotions. And those were the ones that he felt most often could get dragged out into years of therapy or telling your story. And the impact of what these secondary emotions, or what some people call reactive emotions, the indicator of that is that they leave a person feeling weak. They leave a person still somewhat in victim mode. And for the person who is with them or being asked to respond, there's a certain feeling of manipulation. There's a certain feeling of being asked to buy into something. So it's not an expression of feeling that the heart just naturally opens to or is touched by. Although the open heart, of course, is open with everything. But do you know that difference in terms of when we feel touched? And then there are what he calls primary feelings. And primary feelings can be very deep and very intense. The heart tends to naturally respond to those. And they leave a person in their wake. The person is left stronger and more clarified. So that becomes part of the distinction. And then he talked about the things the constellations are particularly good at accessing, which are emotions that come from entanglements. So that emotions that aren't really even your own emotions. So a common example he uses is anger, where let's say you're experiencing anger with your partner, but if you really looked into a constellation, you might discover that there was an ancestor where there had been anger towards the opposite sex, and you're simply entangled in that pattern of anger towards the opposite sex. So there are those kinds of emotions. And then there are what he called meta-emotions. And meta emotions are more like what we're talking about in terms of when the heart is released. So the emotions of awe, of reverence, of delight, those kind of emotions come from the greater soul or through the greater capacity of the heart. So anyway, I don't know if that's useful, but certainly in terms of understanding the power of the heart, you have to get beyond any kind of hallmark sentimentality of viewing the heart simply as the domain of personal emotions, because what we're pointing to and what is possible is so much beyond that, but certainly includes that. And that's part of what enhances and allows for our humanity, our shared humanity, and having this human experience and letting that be totally okay. So, okay.
RVML Resource Center is a volunteer-operated federal 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit organization. RVML is dedicated to providing easy access to a comprehensive collection of information on a variety of metaphysical, spiritual, and personal development subjects. RVML accepts and appreciates all donations. Material and monetary contributions are fully tax-deductible. This recording is not copyrighted, and permission is granted to broadcast, exhibit, or duplicate all or part of this program for non-commercial educational purposes. This live presentation was organized and presented by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. For more information, please visit rvml.org.